Gary Parrish. Welcome to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me. And if you're an NFL fan who is just now joining us because the NFL is going to be over for a while, welcome aboard. It's nice to have you. And here's something that might blow your mind if you haven't been following college basketball. Rick Pitino, at the age of 72, has St. John's now projected to be Big East champions for the first time since 1992 in just his second season with the Red Storm. Norlander, you saw St. John's last week in Connecticut, in stores. They knocked off the back-to-back and reigning national champions. I have said this has become my favorite story in the sport this season. Where does it rank for you?
It's pretty high up there, actually. GP, good to see you. And to the football fans that need to wait until like the day after the Super Bowl to get into college hoops, come on aboard here. We got you covered here on CBS Sports Network and on the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. Please seek us out, and we'll have a little Super Bowl stuff coming later in the show. I'd say the Pitino stuff, and that was an incredible scene on Friday with UConn. We can dig into that even more if you want, GP. I would rank right here and now. Now, this list is going to change as we get into the March and bigger storylines emerge. But right now, I would say in terms of the compelling nature of it, I'd say number one is the SEC's dominance in college hoops this season. I still think that became the number one storyline by the time we got to the first or second week of December. I think it's still number one right now. The SEC could set a record for the most bids in the tournament if it can get to 12. Number two is something we talked about last week here on this show on the CBS Sports Network version of the pod, and that is the Player of the Year race between Janai Broome and Cooper Flagg. It is as tight right now as it's been to any point in the season, even with those two players having lost over the weekend. It's a really big story, and it can get even bigger if they can continue to be awesome. And then I would go Pitino and what he's doing at St. John's as the third most urgent / compelling story. I know that's a little bit different than this is your favorite. I could side with you there as well because I think it's incredible. So we can focus in on that. But I'd actually have Hurley and UConn and everything attached to UConn. Dan Hurley. It's even though UConn is not operating like a top 25 level team right now, Parrish, I'd still have them and what the Huskies are as the reigning two-time champs. I'd still have them in the top 5. And then number 5, I'd probably have the fact that this freshman class has been amazing and one of the best of the past 10 to 15 years. I wrote about that recently at CBSSports.com. It's not just Cooper Flagg. There are a dozen, if not more, freshmen that are really impactful. And as our David Cobb recently wrote as well for CBSSports.com, we are tracking to have the most freshman projected draft picks in a single NCAA tournament this year, more than any year prior. So those would be my top 5, Pitino and St. John's at number 3. But what he's doing right now is incredible.
I'd put it at number 1. It's my favorite. And just because of all the context connected to it. This is a man who's 72 years old, obviously an all-time great. You can make an intelligent case that he is actually the greatest coach in the history of college basketball and would have the records and titles and win totals to justify it had he never left for the NBA. But either way, nobody disputes the idea that he's one of the greatest of all time. And then because of perhaps one too many scandals at Louisville, he gets pushed out of there and then is more or less exiled from Power Conference basketball for 6 years. And as you and I have discussed many times for years, I actually do understand why Louisville felt like they had to move on. It was just one scandal after another. And even if Rick were not directly tied to some of the things and some of the scandals, it still all happened on his watch. And I even think Rick has suggested that he understands on some level why they needed to just start fresh with somebody new. But what I was less understanding of was why nobody else wanted to give him a second chance or another chance, just to allow him to elevate their program in a way that seemed like it was guaranteed to happen if you just give him time. And the truth is, St. John's was finally the Big East program that pulled the trigger on it, and it didn't take much time at all. This is a program that has been off the national radar for much of the past 3 decades. Hasn't even won a conference championship since 1992. That is the year Nirvana's Nevermind came out. Kurt Cobain's daughter is now 32 years old. That is the year Nirvana's Nevermind came out. That's the last time St. John's that's the last time St. John's did something it is now on the verge of doing and is now projected to do. And it's all happening in year 2. And perhaps I'm influenced by it a little more because I think my Marriott account shows I've spent 25 nights in New York City already this year in 2025. Okay. And so I'm just walking the streets of New York, and I don't want to overstate it and be like, they're chanting Go Johnnies down 8th Ave all day long, all night long. But it does feel like it matters in the city. And when St. John's is mattering as much as it's been mattering, and the Knicks are mattering as much as they've been mattering, like basketball has been like popping in Midtown Manhattan, and Rick Pitino is obviously the biggest reason for that right now.
Listen, I'm a music guy. When you said that about Nirvana, I was like, I don't think that Nirvana. Nevermind technically came out in 1991. I only know that because it's one of the biggest music release dates ever. You had Low End Theory by A Tribe Called Quest, Nirvana, Nevermind, Bad Motorfinger by Soundgarden, Blood Sugar Sex Magic come out by the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Pixies, Trompe Le Monde. Huge day. But the 91-92 season does correspond with what we're talking about here. Anytime I can invoke some music chat, I'm obviously going to make it here on the pod. Shouts to Kurt Cobain, Chris Novoselic, and Dave Grohl. What St. John's is doing here is also amazing to me because we are seeing the defensive footprint emerge yet again. And not just like, oh, they're a really, really, good defensive team. No, they are making teams bend to their will. I saw it on Friday. It's incredible that they were able to come back from 26-12 down, Parrish, in that building when Gamble was on fire. Solo ball started off incredibly well. That it was $2 beer night at Gamble Pavilion, and I'll tell you what, the concession lines reflected that for the entirety of the game. And you thought that that UConn would have its big statement. It got out hot, and sure enough, St. John's, Pitino, nah, not going to happen. Not here. Not now. And they've been great the whole season. It's not just now that they're emerging and they're cracking into the polls and doing all that. In fact, the AP poll has refreshed in real time as we're doing the pod. St. John's in the AP just released, now up to number 9. So the first time in decades they've cracked the top 10. It's not just that they're a top 10 team. They only have 3 losses by a combined 5 points. And to me, they have been operating as one of the start to finish. Now we look at where they are right now. This has been a top 10 program, top 10 team this entire season when you have the context of everything that's led up to it.
One last question for you on St. John's. I don't want to ask you if they can really win the Big East because obviously they can. They're projected to do it. How far can they take this? How far can Rick Pitino take the Red Storm? You saw him in person Friday night. Did you think you were looking at a Final Four team, a national championship team? Did they have the pieces to do that type of stuff?
I think they're Final Four good. I wrote that in the column Friday. I want your take on that too before we get out of here, GP. But I think it will take. I think it's going to have to be the right kind of draw. I think there are some certain teams and the way that they're built, both offensively and defensively, that could give them problems. Like just one off the top of my head, I think Tennessee would be a particularly compelling but tough matchup for St. John's. I think a team like Alabama would present that. Auburn obviously is really, really good. So I think they have Final Four DNA, and that's certainly their ceiling. But they might be a team that could benefit from some big matchups here, particularly because, and this is what makes the win at UConn even more impressive, St. John's ranks 346th out of 364 teams, you heard me correctly, in three-point accuracy this season, 29.1% from beyond the arc. And then free throws, they're just 68.9%. That's 282 in the country. Those stats courtesy, as always, of KenPom.com. So those two things in particular, you get a really cold night and you get a team that isn't going to shoot cold from you from beyond the arc. That's how they could get picked off. Frankly, it's how they could get picked off in the second round of the Sweet 16 of the Elite Eight. But I think that they can get to the Final Four. Do you now believe that St. John's also has Final Four defense, knowing full well that the offense isn't nearly as elite as what the defense is?
If you've got a defense like that and a coach like that, you've got a chance. I don't know that I'll predict them to go to the Final Four or win the national championship. And I guess I would be surprised by a national title because you usually, to win that one, to win 6 games, you got to check both sides of the boxes typically. I guess I'd be a little surprised by that, but I would not be surprised by a Final Four. I'm not predicting it, but could I envision it? Absolutely. When you've got a defense like that, a coach like that, you got a chance. When we come back, I want to try to connect the Super Bowl to college basketball because I think I can do it. As I was watching the Eagles destroy the Chiefs last night, it reminded me of a recent title game of the NCAA Tournament. I'll explain after the break. It's the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. Final score, Eagles 40, Chiefs 22. That was last night's Super Bowl, and it was a result that had me thinking of a recent national title game. It felt similar. Let me explain. Last night, what we had leading into the game was the Kansas City Chiefs going for history. They were favored and they were on track, projected to become the first three-peat Super Bowl champion in history. And then the game started and they got overwhelmed, and very quickly it looked like they were on the wrong side of things. 2021 NCAA Tournament Championship game, this is what that reminded me of. Gonzaga Baylor. Leading into it, the entire conversation, best I can remember, is about the Zags on the verge of becoming something we've never had before. Not a three-peat Super Bowl champion, but a 40-0 national champion. College basketball's first 40-0 national championship team. That was the story. And then as soon as the game started, it became pretty clear one of these teams is just physically overwhelming the other team, and it's not Gonzaga doing that to Baylor. It's Baylor doing that to Gonzaga. Scott Drew goes on to win the national championship. Baylor beat them all game long, ultimately by 17 points. That's what Chiefs-Eagles felt like last night to me. Am I on to something here, or did I just maybe have one too many beverages while I was enjoying the Super Bowl?
You didn't, but here's a trivia time.
Okay,
I was in the building for Gonzaga Baylor. That was the COVID tournament. We had Kendrick Lamar put on one heck of a halftime performance. Loved it. Do you remember the halftime performer for the 2021 Final Four?
Was it Miley?
It was Miley. Bingo, bango. Miley Cyrus. Good call. Good recall there. Yep, absolutely. Also, considering the circumstances, she actually put on one heck of a show. I remember because that was obviously it was a very weird time in our world in general. But I got to cover that. That was at Lucas Oil Stadium. It was like half filled. There were seats, swaths of them empty. They couldn't have it to capacity. And then Miley Cyrus was performing on the other end of Lucas Oil Stadium. But I had not heard live music in so long that was one of my more cherished live music experiences, because I was like, she's awesome right now, and I miss concerts. So you bringing up this particular title game got me walking down memory lane right there, GP. She did a great job, and I thought Kendrick was incredible. So I think the vibes of that are similar. Also, but I also think what happened in the Super Bowl, and although we said this on the Sunday show, we're not going to get into the Chiefs' defensive line issues. We're going to bypass that right now. You had a quarterback and a player you had the guy who's recognized as the best player in his sport. I don't know if there had ever been a player in the thick of their prime perform worse at the biggest stage than maybe Mahomes. If there are, the list is low. So there's no college basketball analogy for this in general, but the way that Baylor overran Gonzaga was stunning. And if you go back and look at the KenPom rankings, that was an 86-70 Baylor win. Baylor got up by as much as 20. They were out immediately, and it was over. Gonzaga still rates as the best overall team that season because one game doesn't make a season, and Gonzaga over the course of 40 games was the best in 2020, 2021. But similar to the Chiefs, Gonzaga needed the Jalen Suggs prayer, one of the biggest shots in tournament history, to get past UCLA. The Chiefs have been playing close game after close game. So there's a little bit of that. I do have some comps for you, though. Okay. The only comp we have of a reigning champion making the final game the ensuing season and getting rolled is Pete Newell's Cal team in 1960, which lost by 20 points to Ohio State in the 1960 title game. That's the only other time where you had a sitting champion make it to the big stage, last game, the ensuing season, and just get dominated. There are a few other ones that apply here, though. We had a two-time champion being in the spot. In 1957, San Francisco had won 2 in a row, and in the national semis had lost by 24 to Kansas, a Kansas team that went on 2 days later to lose to North Carolina in the greatest title game ever because it was a 3-overtime affair back in the 1950s. Check it out, kids. And then I got 2 more for you, GP. Arizona 1998 was a 1 seed. It won in 97. It was a 1 seed. It got smacked in the Elite Eight, losing to Utah, coached by Rick Majerus. That was Michael Doliak, Andre Miller. No Keith Van Horn on that team, kids. And then 2001, Michigan State, the year after it won, was a 1 seed, made it to the Final Four. And then Arizona was on the better end of that one. That was a great Arizona team that lost to Duke in that national championship. That Michigan State team, coached by Tom Izzo, lost by 19 in the national semifinals. Those are some other comparisons. I got one more, and I think you know it too, and you can bring it up. But the UNLV over Duke one in 90 was a domination. But I would actually argue that That didn't feature. Duke had never won a title under Coach K. Coach K wasn't Coach K at that point. UNLV was considered as good as, if not the better team going into that game. And so that's the biggest blowout in title game history. The Chiefs actually made the margin, a little bit more respectable. There's no true A to A analogy here, but this was a fun thought exercise. And the Baylor Gonzaga one is the most recent one. But rarely do you ever see a team that was acknowledged as the best in the midst of a potential dynasty go in and get mowed over the way that happened in football. We typically don't see that in college hoops. But if you want some comps, I got some comps.
Yeah, that's all good stuff. You fanned it out a little more than I was willing to. I was a little more specific in I just punching these dots. Team on the verge, one more went away from going down in history as something that's never happened before. You're favored to do it, and then you just get smacked from the opening thing and never recover and never look like you were anywhere close to doing what we all spent, the previous 24, 48 hours insisting you were about to do. That's what popped into my head. I remember feeling that way while watching Gonzaga Baylor and last night while watching Chiefs Eagles. I knew everything I knew heading into the game, but once you put your eyes on it, and yes, the defensive line problems showed themselves, it was clear, one of these teams this is a mismatch. This is a mismatch on a football field, and that's what Gonzaga Baylor was back in 2021. On that court, on that night, it was a mismatch. We come back, turn our attention to the coaching carousel. The Indiana job is open, you might have heard. Michigan's Dusty May was asked about it this weekend. Do we think he'll seriously consider leaving Michigan after just one season? I'm going to ask Norlander that question next. It's the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. It's going to be a busy coaching carousel. We already know that. Miami open, Florida State open, Virginia open, and last week officially it became open as well. Indiana will have to hire a new coach. Mike Woodson is out, effective at the end of this season. And coincidentally, one day after Indiana announced this, that Mike Woodson will not return next season, Dusty May, an Indiana alum, was coaching Michigan inside Assembly Hall. Michigan wins the game. And afterward, Dusty May was asked about the Indiana job. Would he consider it? Does he have any message for Michigan fans? He said more or less what most coaches say in these situations, nothing definitive in either direction. But let me ask you this, because it is quite literally the first question I was asked by a buddy I work with here who's a Michigan fan. He said, GP, are we really going to lose our coach after 1 year to Indiana? How seriously do you think Dusty May will consider, if offered, the Indiana job?
Oh, okay. Dive into the mind of Dusty May. And by the way, if you're intrigued by the topic, we went long on this on our Sunday episode. Go find that in the feed or on YouTube. But let's hit on some notes that we didn't necessarily talk about on the Sunday show. I would think that if Michigan can't get a deal renegotiated quickly, and there's actually a recent comparison for this, by the way, I'll get to that in just a second. So let's assume that Michigan can't get a contract in front of Dusty May by March 5th or something. It's February 10th when we're talking right now, and they don't move to get it done in time for whatever reason, because they don't want to or they don't feel like they should or whatever. That's it. That doesn't happen. Then how seriously would Dusty May consider it if he's believed to be in the candidate pool the same way that he was in the candidate pool last year for Ohio State, and then he was for Louisville, and then he was for Vanderbilt. He just went through this a year ago. I think he is probably going to have to seriously contemplate it just because of his roots there. He has family there. His wife still has family there that live around that area. They met in Indiana. Obviously, that's his alma mater. I think it is fair to seriously consider it. If I was him, I would not take it. Now, I didn't grow up and I didn't go to a traditional blue blood program. I have not walked his path, so I'm really removing myself. But and this isn't advice for him to do it. I'm just saying if I was in his spot and I'd look at everything, I'd say, I didn't go to Louisville in part because I did not want to deal with a lot of the fishbowl-esque elements involved in that. And Michigan provided me an amazing opportunity at a proud program. No, it's not the biggest deal there. That is football, and I can operate the way that I want to operate there. And now that Indiana is open, Could the Heights at the absolute best case scenario maybe be better than they are at Michigan? I mean, maybe, but what if you are really an incredible coach and you go on and you win a national championship or make 2 or 3 Final Fours at Michigan in addition to what you did at FAU? I would make the argument that you're going to have perhaps an easier and better year-over-year experience at Michigan than you would at Indiana. And to be clear, as we talk on this, we don't even know if Indiana will prioritize Dusty May, but quite obviously, quite publicly, he's a prominent alum. They could have tried to get him last year. They couldn't get it done. He's doing a wonderful job at Michigan right now, which is a Big Ten championship contender a year after winning only 8 games. So it only makes sense that he would be on an alleged 3, 4, 5 name list of the top candidates. Those are my thoughts. What about you when it comes to Dusty and what you think should or would happen if IU comes calling?
Well, first, and this isn't revisionist history, Indiana's mistake was not doing this a year ago. And you and I have discussed this before. It's possible Dusty takes Michigan over Indiana if they're both offered last year. I don't know. But that was your best shot to get this done if you're Indiana. Now you got to lure him away from a big job where, his family is now settled. His kids are in school. You gotta lure him away from that. You gotta make him move the second time in 2 years. That's a big ask. And so Indiana made a mistake last season, not doing with Mike Woodson what it appeared they were going to eventually do someday anyway, and probably sooner rather than later. Now here we are. As for what Dusty will do, I'm not sure. What should he do? Don't even know that either. And this is one of those topics where when I was younger, I was sure of everything. When I was a younger person, I could send you the columns from 29-year-old me, 32-year-old me. And I had great advice for what every coach in America should do. Take this job, don't take that job, consider this job. And then I got older and I realized I don't have any idea what another person should do with their life any more than a person has any clue to what I should be doing with my career. I mean, we all can rate jobs, but you don't know what matters to another human unless you really sit down and talk to them. I've made career choices, and not everyone is the obvious career choice when I made it. But it made the most sense for me for a variety of reasons, and family plays a big role in that. And so I have gone from a columnist / analyst who spent my late 20s, early 30s telling everybody what they ought to do and probably saying things like, and if you don't, you're an idiot. And now I just don't feel that way about any of this, because if it has always been Dusty's dream to coach the Hoosiers and that still matters to him and he can get back his family closer to more family, and that's really nothing else matters more than that, then yeah, he should probably do it. But I don't know if that registers with him at all. I think Brad Stevens has talked about this before when it's constantly brought up about him coming back to college basketball or changing jobs. And he'll say, I've been in Boston now a long time. This is my home. This is where my kids are growing up. Indiana's not my home anymore. I don't know how Dusty feels about all these things, but to find out what he will do or should do, you got to have the answer to that kind of stuff way more than you're just talking about which job is better, because he might not. Which job is better? They're both great jobs in theory. Which job is better could rank 6th on the list of things that you have to consider if you're Dusty May and you're considering something like this.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting plot line to follow if we don't get an update, 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, heck, even 4 weeks from now, even March 10th Indiana's got plenty of time. In fact, I had a source tell me over the weekend they thought that Indiana opening the way that it did might work against them with a couple of candidates, because now you are allowing, and I'll get to what I referenced at the start of this hit, you are allowing schools, if indeed they're hoping and wanting to renegotiate to lock their guys down, now that this is so publicly out there, they can get ahead of it. They can renegotiate the contracts and kind of stave off those candidates there. There's a coach right now in the Big Ten that had a really nice year one at a spot. And that coach and that coach's representation, understandably so. Okay, you get in year one, you did a good job, and can we talk about maybe renegotiating the contract? And this coach is old school, and the leadership there decided to drag its feet a little bit and wasn't active on it. And then what happened? That coach bounced after a year, went to a different job where he's thrived since then. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Brad Underwood, obviously.
Correct. Brad Underwood was at Oklahoma State for 1 year. Oklahoma State was slow to move, and then he went to Illinois. And since Brad Underwood's gotten at Illinois, he's basically run the second best, at worst, third best program in the Big Ten since he got there, right there with behind Purdue. And then you want to call, Michigan State or take your pick there. They've done a great job. Michigan is now in a spot here where if it wants to not be in that same spot, it should renegotiate with Dusty May, who is, again, we're only 1 year in. There's no guarantee that Michigan is going to be a top 20 program for the next 8 years if Dusty May is there. But if you don't want to lose him to Indiana and you're really satisfied, this is how it goes. And you're going to have to renegotiate or take the chance that he's just going to be satisfied enough with where you're at and not choose to go to his alma mater.
I would have an extension, like for all intents and purposes, I would have an extension with a raise and everything he thinks he needs on his desk now. Because you're exactly right. What happened with Brad Underwood should be a lesson for Michigan and every other school that's got a coach they love who is in high demand. Because I don't think Brad had any interest in going to Illinois. Just like the job's open. The way that goes down is these guys are all represented by about 5 people, and they're all talking to athletic directors nonstop. In Brad Underwood's case, it's Brett Just. I don't know exactly how that went down, but it was something like this. You're an agent representing a million coaches, including Brad Underwood, and you're on the phone with the Illinois people. And you're trying to help them find their next coach. They're talking to you because it's 4 of the clients they're interested in are under your umbrella. And then something like this gets said. Would you be interested in Brad Underwood? Well, of course, but he just got to Oklahoma State. He's not leaving Oklahoma State after a year. He might. You interested? Well, why would he be upset? Because we've been trying to get a new deal done with them, and they kept putting us off the entire season. Yeah, let's just talk after the season. Yeah, let's just talk after the season. And then ultimately, they said, all right, fine. But feelings get hurt. Egos get burned. And then somebody else, think about what you got. You got one employer telling you, just wait, we'll talk later. And another possible employer saying, please come, we'll give you everything you ever wanted. Well, that's how you get pulled out the door. And if you were Michigan, that's the last thing you would want to happen. In other words, if Dusty May leaves you for Indiana someday, make sure if you're the athletic director there, you can stand up and tell your fans that was his heart. There was nothing we could do. Trust me, from the moment the Indiana job opened, and even before that, we were trying to get a new deal done. He did not leave us for money. He did not leave us for resources. He left us because his heart is in Bloomington and we can't do anything about it. You got to be able to say that if you lose him. If it's ever about money or you drug your feet or any stuff like that, well, that's how you didn't handle it properly. And I'm assuming Michigan will learn from that Oklahoma State lesson. And if they lose their coach, it'll be for the reasons I just explained. It won't have anything to do with contracts.
Sounds good. GP, since we started, we've got the AP poll that is refreshed in real time. We almost never get this on the pod, a real-time AP Top 25 refresh. You want to talk what teams are where, what we agree with, what we don't, and if Auburn was able to stay number 1?
Well, hey, AP poll is out. Auburn is number 1. So the AP voters, they did their job well. Just because the Tigers lost over the weekend, they didn't lose the top spot in college basketball's most referenced poll. We'll dive into that. We'll do it next. It's the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. The AP poll has updated, and Auburn remains number 1, even after losing a home game to Florida over the weekend. This is not unprecedented, but it is rare. Typically, a number 1 team loses, it drops in the rankings. And so I sort of understand why one commentator after another just sort of, as they're watching Auburn go down at home, started saying on television all day long, and there'll be a new number 1 in the AP poll on Monday. But as I tweeted on Saturday, I mean, maybe, but there shouldn't be, because Auburn still has the best body of work in the sport by a wide margin. I didn't know if AP voters were collectively going to do enough to keep Auburn at the top of the rankings. But as I wrote this morning in the lead to the top 25 and 1 at CBSSports.com, if you are an AP voter who wants your poll, which is the most referenced poll in college basketball, to be an accurate reflection of how this sport is unfolding this season, then you need to have a 1 next to Auburn's name. They did it. I congratulate them.
Yeah, listen, whether or not Auburn is number one on February 10th or not will not have any impact on if Auburn will be the number one overall seed or a one seed, but it is refreshing. And I'm going to leave GP to take the credit on this because I guess I'm just a little, maybe I'm draped in much too much humility. I genuinely believe that the fact that, the podcast is watched and listened to by people that cover the sport, and we were stumping for this to be the case, and the general advancement in how people cover the sport, the array of analytics sites from Ken Palm to evamia.com to Bart Torvik and on down the line. Well, GP said is correct. It's not unprecedented, but it is uncommon. And I believe if it was 12 years ago and the same teams had the same set of results, we'd be talking about Alabama being number one. But Auburn is still it. And it was close. Auburn received 34 first-place votes. Alabama, 23. Florida got 3 first-place votes. In fact, Florida is tied with Duke technically in third this week. And then 5th is Tennessee, 6 is Houston, 7 is Purdue, 8 is A&M, 9 is St. John's, 10 is Iowa State. So good on Auburn. This also sets up the first ever matchup between number 1 and number 2 when both teams in 1 and 2 are in the SEC. There have been times when the SEC has had the number 1 and number 2 team in the country, but there's never until this upcoming Saturday been an instance where the 1 and 2 teams in the country were in the SEC and they played when they were number 1 and number 2. And the fact that it is 2 teams obviously so well known for their meetings and history in the Iron Bowl and football, and now you've got Auburn and Bama. That's a wonderful development for college hoops. That is the marquee. It's actually Saturday. We've got a couple of really good ones. We'll get to that later in the week on the Eye on College Basketball podcast, but getting a 1 versus 2 in the middle of February, right when the Super Bowl has ended, pretty well timed. And this is going to dovetail with the fact that on CBS on Saturday, as we do once a year, every year, the selection committee will convene this week and decide the 1 through 16 seed list, and we'll get the top 4 in each region. That'll air early on Saturday afternoon on CBS, and then a short time after that, it'll be Auburn and Bama going against each other, and what almost definitely will be Auburn's going to be the number 1 overall seed in that scenario, even if it were to lose against Vanderbilt, because Auburn's resume, as we've discussed plenty, GP, is streets ahead of anyone else vying for the number 1 overall spot.
I can't sit here and take credit for Auburn being number 1 in the AP poll. I wouldn't be comfortable doing that, obviously.
I feel like you should. I'm trying to get you there.
But I did tweet about it on Saturday, wrote about it on Sunday, wrote about it on Monday in a way that Bruce Pearl retweeted it. And I really do think if you're an AP voter following the sport even a little, you were in your own social media even a little, you probably ran into one of those tweets, one of those stories, one of those things that details just how far of the pack Auburn actually is. As I tried to explain on the podcast previously, think of Auburn not as a basketball team, but as a golfer. And think of the season as a golf tournament, and think of Auburn with like a 5-shot lead over the field. Okay, they just bogeyed at home against Florida. That's not great. Somebody birdied, somebody parred. The gap's closed a little, but there's a gap. Put some numbers on it. Auburn's 12-2 in quadrant 1. So who do you want to replace them at number 1? Alabama? Alabama is 20-3 overall, 7-3 in quadrant 1. Auburn's 21-2 overall, 12-2 in quadrant 1. So Auburn's got the better record, fewer losses, and 5 more quadrant 1 wins. What are we even talking about? You want to do Duke? It's 20-3 overall, 5-3 in quadrant 1. Auburn's got fewer losses and 7 more quadrant 1 wins. It doesn't matter which one you try to bring up and compare to what Bruce Pearl's team has. It's not even close still on this day. And again, I can't take credit for it, but somebody did do a project one time that detailed how the top 25 and 1 does influence the AP poll. So I can't take credit, but if you wanted to give me credit, I will humbly accept it.
You can take the credit. The way you want to do Duke, okay, I got Duke for you. Here's how. That's just too that's too good, man. Yeah, listen, good developments for the SEC, for Auburn, for Alabama overall, and the SEC now trying to, broadly speaking here, as a reminder, I said this earlier today on CBS Sports HQ. Most folks realize it, but just as a reminder, how teams are ranked in the AP Top 25 has zero and I mean zero impact on how they get seated, because the committee doesn't look at AP rankings. It won't look at it when they convene in Indy this week. But there can be some correlation between, obviously, if you've got a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 next to your name, like you've usually won enough that you should be in that 1-2 seed conversation. But just keep that. Also remember and keep that in mind. As an example, like Houston's got a game against Baylor tonight, and we'll preview tonight and Tuesday in just a few here. But Houston does not have the overall resume to validate, or at least that corresponds with what its record is so far to this point. So just keep that in mind. The rankings, they get refreshed every Monday. Fan bases love to see where their team is at and they aren't. They love to rave or rant about it, and I get all that. But there is no correlation between how AP voters collectively choose to assemble a top 25 and what the selection committee looks at from a resume perspective. And so if you want the bridge between both of those, Gary Parrish's daily top 25 and 1 rankings does that for you, because GP is assembling it as if he was doing a resume rankings quasi bracketology deal. So if you want to see a better list of teams that is going to reflect more closely to what is going to be the case in bracketology and with seeding, go to the CBSSports.com or check your CBS Sports app for GP's top 25 and 1.
One last thing on this, because I can already tell you where we might be headed, and then I'm going to have a problem because I'll end up contradicting myself. Auburn and Alabama don't lose again until they play on Saturday. Alabama beats Auburn. Auburn on Sunday will still have the best resume in the sport. It won't be that close, but they will at that point have lost 2 of 3 and just got beat by the number 2 team. Then do you have to elevate Alabama, even though its entire body of work will not match Auburn's? But that's where I do think you can start pointing to recency stuff a little bit. I don't know. I can just already imagine where I'm going to be at next Saturday night, Sunday morning.
Well, I think you need to stand your ground. Are you not a man of principles?
No. Ask anybody who really knows me. I don't have very many principles.
Okay, so enough public pressure and recency bias, and then you'll just fold.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. No, I genuinely just want to get to the right conclusion. If I'm being serious. Yeah. I just want to reach the right conclusion, and that is one where I think you can argue it both ways. Yes, the best body of work still belongs to this team, but on the other hand, that team would have lost 2 of 3, and I think you can start to discount the entire body of work based on recent stuff. You know what? I saw something on Instagram that said like 95% of the stuff you worry about is stuff that never happens, so stop worrying about it. I'm not going to sit here on Monday worrying about the result of an Alabama-Auburn game for the upcoming weekend. I'll deal with it if I have to deal with it, and you know what? Maybe I won't have to at all. One more segment to go. We're going to use it to look ahead to the next couple of nights. We got interesting games tonight. Busy schedule on Tuesday. We'll get you ready next. It's the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast, CBS Sports Network. Before we get out of here, let's look ahead to the next couple of nights, because Monday's good and then Tuesday busy. On Monday, Baylor at Houston, North Carolina at Clemson. Obviously, Hubert Davis at a blue blood school is dealing with some of the same conversations that Mike Woodson was having to deal with at Indiana. I don't think it's nearly as pressing in Chapel Hill as it was in Bloomington, but obviously every game at this point for Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels is a big game, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, listen, UNC narrowly dodged a home defeat to Pitt over the weekend, GP, and in doing so just still kept its tournament hopes alive. It's not in the field right now. Super intriguing matchup, because you're playing at Clemson, which is coming off the high of the Duke win. I'm interested to see the preparation, the body language from both of these teams. Clemson now easily tracking to a comfortable tournament seed. Can it get another, decent win? It's not nearly on the level of Duke. It's not even close. Meantime, if Carolina can win here, okay, then maybe they got a shot, but a loss and hope might all be lost for the Tar Heels.
Looking ahead to Tuesday, we've actually got a triple header on CBS Sports Network. 7 Eastern, BYU at West Virginia. 9 Eastern, UConn at Creighton. 11 Eastern, it's San Diego State at San Jose State. And then Inside College Basketball will recap the night for you. 30-minute edition live from the CBS Broadcast Center in New York City. Norlander, let's focus on UConn at Creighton. We talked about St. John's earlier. The biggest threat in the Big East standings to the Johnnies is the Creighton Blue Jays. And UConn, obviously, coming off of a loss, just got Liam McNeely healthy. make sense of that matchup for me. How pressing is it for UConn? Just to, when you were the back-to-back champs and expected to take a real run at a three-peat, you don't expect to have this type of resume at this moment.
Yeah, no, we mentioned it at the top of the show when we were running down, some of the most compelling storylines. I still think UConn and, a year after going back to back and Dan Hurley and how he's made big headlines there, still a team worth watching. And you check out bracket predictions right now, like UConn's in that 8-9 seed range, which is fascinating to think about. We'll see if they can course correct enough to, get into the 4-5-6 line overall. But if they don't win this game, and it's going to be tough to do so, the idea that we might have UConn like in an 8-9 game, maybe that's incredible to me. Because we know how dangerous that team can be, but you want to avoid that. Go and return the favor, because Creighton on New Year's Eve won at UConn. Can they split here? Dan Hurley talked about it after the game on Friday night when they lost to St. John's. They've got real point guard issues right now because Hassan Diarra is not fully healthy. Aiden Mahaney's not a true point guard. Amon Noel, the freshman's also been banged up, and so they don't have nearly the level that they had the past two seasons with their backcourt leadership and playmaking ability. Meantime, on the other side for Creighton, one game behind St. John's, and deserves a lot of love and attention and shine for what Greg McDermott lost Pop Isaacs, expected to be their most reliable and dependable scorer. That happened in December, and since then they've been able to peel off a great 7-week stretch here, 8-week stretch. And so if you want to catch St. John's, pick off the Huskies. That's an awesome tip, 9 Eastern on Tuesday on CBS Sports Network.
So Creighton, obviously a team that has flipped its season. There was a moment in time where if you gathered us and other people who follow the sport, you'd have been like, they might have lost too much, and now Pop Isaacs is out, and maybe Creighton's going to slip a little bit relative to where it's been lately. There was a moment where most people would have thought that, and they flipped their season. And elsewhere on Tuesday night, we've got two teams playing each other that have both done something similar. Elsewhere on Tuesday night, you got a list of games: Tennessee at Kentucky, Florida at Mississippi State, Purdue at Michigan, UCLA at Illinois, Alabama at Texas, Indiana at Michigan State. Busy Tuesday, I told you. Arizona at Kansas State. Two teams that have flipped their seasons completely. Arizona went from 4-5 to nationally ranked and surging as a real Big 12 threat. Kansas State still got a ways to go to get back in the bubble conversation, but on a 5-game winning streak right now, coming off a big win over their in-state rival, Kansas. And as you and I joked on Sunday's episode of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, if you run the data at barttorvik.com, just during this 5-game winning streak that Kansas State is on, they are playing like the best team in the country. They have gone from one of the worst in the Big 12 to one of the best in the entire country. I don't know if they're going to be able to get it where they need to get it to actually be in the bubble conversation, because, again, they're not there yet. But it is a neat story, and both of these programs are experiencing something similar. Not so great starts, really going well right now.
Yeah, I can be quick for you here, GP. Those are the two hottest teams in the Big 12, and if Kansas State can win it, then we can talk even more EMAW, Every Man a Wildcat, on the Wednesday edition of the pod. That's got plenty of urgency to it in general. Tuesday is loaded. By the way, Auburn is at Vanderbilt, and Auburn's coming off a game where Bruce Pearl was talking about how they didn't prep well. Keep an eye on that. Vandy in the tournament picture. That's even a sneaky good one. The Wednesday version of the podcast is going to be loaded because we're going to have plenty of results to get to. I want to see how Kentucky looks at home against Tennessee. Defensively, how do they show up there? Purdue playing at Michigan, super compelling. UCLA at Illinois. Mick Cronin, he's got to go a couple of time zones. How are they going to look there? Texas has a huge and urgent home game against Bama, GP. Like, there is so much. Tuesday night is absolutely stacked up and loaded, so we will have plenty to get to. Wednesday show, at most, all shows are must watch, must listen to, but Wednesday we are going to have no shortage of goodies to recap from what goes down Tuesday night.
I don't think most shows are must watch. You can skip one every once in a while, probably. But I appreciate the confidence you have in us. But obviously, big game, Kansas, Arizona, and the entire schedule on Tuesday night. Awesome. We'll talk about it Wednesday morning, live on YouTube. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Terry T. Legend, Huck Larnell. Thank all of you for watching the Eye on College Basketball podcast. If you're not subscribed, please go subscribe anywhere you subscribe to podcasts, and we will talk to you again on CBS Sports Network next Tuesday. Till then, take care.